Okay, what is up, guys? We're back, and we're gonna, obviously get into another video. This is gonna be another one that is mainly focused around just one topic, and it's one that I've picked out. This I talked about just last month, and I thought it'd make for a decent video, right? So, I guess what we'll do now is I'll just, get started with it and get into it. So, something I observed last month was just like how, isotopes can be stable or unstable and how they can, decay. There are ideologies that can also be stable and unstable, right? But not in the same way, because while isotopes, there's different amounts of protons and neutrons that affect it and make it stable or unstable. That's different, from the idea of ideologies, because one of them has a set limit and the other one is not really a set limit. So let's actually get into this. So let's start at something like really simple. Everyone should be able to understand this. All ideologies, right? Every ideology that exists in the world right now requires people to believe in it. Like, let's use democracy. People have to believe in voting for it to work, because otherwise you're going to have very few people who vote, and if they're the only ones who, believe in the system, then who knows what's going to happen. I mean, anything could happen at that point once most people don't believe in the system. And so if your ideology requires a lot of effort and time and other related things, right, to convince people to adopt that ideology, and also not only that, but how well they integrate into it, that's a good indicator of how stable the ideology is, right? Now, let's go back to democracy. How democracy, it's not really that difficult to convince people to adopt it, and it doesn't take that much time for most people to integrate into it. So we can call that a stable ideology, right? So, yeah, we've already established that there is a stable ideology that is, likely going to be able to sustain itself for a long period of time. But if we were to take something like in the current age, like communism or anarcho-capitalism, or another one of those, ridiculous things like anarcho-egoism, or something else just ridiculously insane, accelerationism, all these ideologies are unstable, right? Because they take a lot of effort and they take a lot of time to convince people to actually adopt these beliefs, since a lot of them are very strange and out there. They're not down to earth. And of course, you could blame that on the education of a person, but even most, college people would probably have a problem. Oh my, that sounded weird. Most college people would probably have an issue with believing these things. In fact, they might be less likely to actually believe in these things. But yeah, so these things would be unstable, because not only would it take more time and effort to convince people that, yes, we should adopt this, but they would also have time, fully adapting to these ideologies. Now, a lot of what makes an ideology stable or unstable can be, the time, right? I mean, yes, like, to convince people right now of democracy, it's very easy, because, that's like the contemporary political ideology, right? But if we were in a time where, say, most nations were communist, just hypothetically, then it would be easier for, say, communism. Communism could even be a stable ideology, but right now, communism really isn't a stable ideology, and considering the social stigma around it, it's likely going to be an unstable ideology for a while longer, although that is slowly dissipating away, unfortunately. But let's continue. So, an unstable ideology has a risk of, collapsing, right? And obviously, the people in charge of the country who believe in that ideology don't want that to happen, but they also want to keep their ideology. So what are they going to do? Well, because most of these ideologies tend to be on the more authoritarian, anti-liberty side, because, that's where a lot of contemporary opinion is. Like, yes, we want to have the freedom to do a lot of things, which makes sense. Then they're going to do things, that are more authoritarian, because most of these, unstable ideologies are like that. They can do what the USSR did, which with their purges and how they purged a large section of the military. And also, you can do what libertarians propose, or anarcho-capitalists propose. They say that they would propose forced removal of people who do not follow the non-aggression principle in their country. And I've talked about the non-aggression principle. I won't get really into it. But these are just examples of how these ideologies would do these things. And so you have to get rid of the people who are not just, easily swayed, because it's difficult. You can't spend all of your time as a nation with a strange ideology just converting people to believe that ideology. That should be something that we can all grasp and understand, right? Now, another issue with unstable ideologies is that they tend to be frowned upon, just because, that's just natural, because if you need to convince people of it, usually when you have a nation that's trying to convince people of an unstable ideology, and it takes a lot of time and effort to do that, there's going to be a lot of people outside of that country who's going to see that, and they're going to think, geez, that country is weird. That country has a strange ideology, and we don't like them because of that. And ideological differences, funnily enough, two unstable ideologies, Nazism and communism, actually, clashed, like in World War II. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the whole idea of this. Now, of course, it goes even further than that, because there can be times where an ideology may go from being unstable to stable, but in its own environment. Like, for example, Nazi Germany had a very stable ideology because didn't take much to convince people of it because of the factors at the time. Think about it. They had just lost a ton of land to the east. They had lost Alsace-Lorraine. They had lost some more smaller territories elsewhere. They had lost their colonies. The economy was terrible. They had a weak government. Nothing was going good for them. And so when you have a party that comes along and promises change, and they know who has caused this damage to us, and they are going to get retribution against them, that doesn't take that much, difficulty. So in Germany itself, during that time, Nazism was a stable ideology. Of course, you were going to still have indoctrination and whatnot, but it didn't take much time and effort to convince people. I mean, indoctrination wasn't as necessary, say, as in a place like in North Korea, where the situation might not have called for it just as much. But both of them are still going to have the policy of indoctrination. But later on, anyways, either way, in Germany, we could say that Nazism had become more so of an unstable ideology, where, it was becoming more and more difficult to convince people that this was the right thing. A lot of people in Germany had already changed their minds at the later parts of the war, and, a lot of people just hated the Nazis after the war too, and so that's not really a surprise, obviously, but it shows how an ideology that was once stable, at least in one area, can get unstable. And there's also one more layer to it, and if you're wondering what that layer is, it's basically that a nation can have its own ecosystem of what counts as stable and unstable, while the rest of the world can consider that as stable or unstable, and nations with those unstable ideologies are seen as just, unstable themselves. So, let's say Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, let's say in 1934, they had a stable ideology, right? But the world saw it more so as an unstable ideology. Of course, anti-Jewish sentiment was still a thing, was not a weak thing back then either, but a lot of its ideals, considering that it mainly was supposed to appeal to Germans, it does make sense that, you know, it would have been considered a very unstable ideology elsewhere, and the only way that you could have a extreme stable ideology for the entire world is if it is not you know, like, emphasizing a single country, because otherwise, if it's promoting just your country and being against other countries, like how Nazi Germany thought it was the greatest thing in the world, thought every other nation was just, like, inferior to them, then no one's going to be convinced of that. So you're obviously just going to have a unstable ideology in the greater world. And of course, not in the country itself, but in the world. But yeah, that's pretty much the concept of stable and unstable ideologies. I think that it does make basic sense, and I think that this video will be a bit more interesting to have listened to. If you did actually listen to this, please comment down below and maybe tell me what you thought about this idea. But, you know, enough talking about, you know, telling you to engage. Let's actually, you know, get to the outro, which I'll see you in like some hours. Okay, we're at the end here. I honestly really enjoyed making this video. I hope you had a good time watching it, but yeah, I kind of want to enjoy the rest of my time today, so I'm just gonna, you know, have a short outro. I will see you in the next video.